So yeah, I think we can just start our session tonight. Yeah, Neville and Pak Ruko and all who already joining us. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm not so sure where are you all, and great to have our second week of the lecture series as part of the we call it as the EPOH. Yeah, it's a evolutionary planning of the capital habitat 45 as part of our initiative in collaboration with Mars Architect, organized by Neville and us from the Department of Urban and Regional Planning, Diponegoro University, to launch Nusantara Planning and Design competition. And happy to have the second week of the lecture series as the part of the competition programs to give a platform for the participants to get some innovative idea for the Nusantara, the new capital of Indonesia, that brings the concept of the forest city. So thank you, Michelle. I hope I pronounce your name correctly,
Yes,
Michelle.
perfect.
I'm happy to having your lecture tonight. Maybe later on, Neville would like also to add some words to introduce Michelle to all of us. And yeah, I think I will stop here and I will offer to you, Neville, before maybe Michelle can start the presentation for the lectures. Please, Neville.
Wonderful. Thank you, Provoost. Michelle, I'm going to try and take the screen back from you and share one slide, basically a slide of you. Not okay, if that's possible.
I'll stop sharing.
Let's see where we are. No, not this one. There we go. Or actually, let's start right here. Yeah, thank you. It is very exciting to be here with everybody again for the second talk in this series. I will, yeah. So as Provoost mentioned, this is a rather ambitious project with the, I'm proud to say, very sturdy team to guide us through this whole process. And specifically tonight, or in Holland this afternoon, I'm very honored and it's a great pleasure to introduce Michelle Provoost. I intentionally grabbed this from LinkedIn because not everybody will know her on this webinar. Although in Holland and certainly everywhere where she is active with her company that she co-founded, Crimson, she is more than renowned. I think it's fair to say that Crimson has kind of carved out a niche for themselves that is truly unique, and I would say more places would benefit from this historical perspective. We tend to have the tendency as architects and planners to constantly want to reinvent the wheel, and Michelle has on more than one occasion indicated, and I think that will be the case tonight as well, that the wheel has often been reinvented many times before us, and we should learn from that. And maybe if we're lucky, she might even indicate that there was no wheel to invent to begin with, but that's for the talk itself. Finally, there's a long list that you can read online. I will only highlight that she's particularly equipped to join us tonight as co-founder also of the INTI, the International Newtown Institute, who's kind of leading the way in thinking about new town planning. With that, here, this is their website, Crimson. Very exciting, chock-a-chock blog full with interesting content, so please have a look. And with that, I'd like to hand it back to you, Michelle.
Okay, Thank you. Let me take back the screen. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, so thanks for the invitation and thanks for the introductions. I'm very happy to be here with this interesting and important project that you are undertaking. I'm also glad that Neville introduced me as a historian, because that is indeed how I was trained, and that is also how I got interested a few decades ago already in the whole phenomenon of these cities that are built from scratch, and this is how I got to be the director of this International Newtown Institute, which is based in Rotterdam in the Netherlands. Now, there's many angles that you can take, of course, towards the planning of cities. Coming from my background, it made sense to take the angle of urban planning and design, and to have a focus on the social and cultural aspects of cities. So not so much the financial, not so much the technical, there's many sides to it, of course, but these seem to be our most specific angles. And the way we research that is mostly by workshops, in which we do research by design. So there is an overlap between our research and the design practice of architects and planners. And we have been doing that in many countries up to now, not in Indonesia, but who knows? I know that Neville in the first lecture already talked about what actually is a new town. And if you think about it, it is maybe not so strange that there are different definitions going around. If you look at the new towns that exist all over the world, and there's hundreds or maybe even a few thousand of them, they are all different, but they have in common that they were built by means of a master plan on a place where there was no city before, maybe a small village or a small settlement, but not a city. So it's sort of an instant city, you could say. And here you see some examples of that. We also mapped these new cities that are still being built this is only from the last 10, 15 years. And they are built especially in countries that are economically developing. So it's not so very surprising that especially China and India, but also Indonesia, would be in the forefront of these new town building. The images that you see on the left are from China, but also from Saudi Arabia, where the new town building is seen as part of an economic development plan. And I think depending on your taste, depending on your background, depending on your view on society and the future, you can see different things here. So some people see quite spectacular new cities with high rises, new architecture, defined by smart technology. Others might see a sort of a fatal mixture between Corbusian ideas from Le Corbusier and the traditional American CBD, cities that are meant for the happy few and that are basically economic real estate projects. So there's different ways to look at this. And I would like to shed a bit of light on that. We've also done that in two previous publications. Rising in the East was about present day new towns in Asia. And To Build a City in Africa was published 5-6 years ago, about the new wave of cities being planned in Africa. I will get back to that later. And these publications you could also view on our website, if it had not been hacked by an Indonesian casino company. Irony here. So yes, what I would like to do now is to talk about this specific kind of new towns, which is the capital cities, especially from the point of view that Neville already mentioned, like, of course, every generation has to invent its own wheel, I would say, but you can definitely learn from mistakes, but also of good things that have been invented already. So I would like to talk a little bit about a small number of capital cities, why they have been planned, how they turned out, and what lessons I think you can learn from that. And I will mainly be talking about Brasilia, of course, Abuja, and the new administrative capital in Egypt. But first of all, you have to think of this idea that new towns are always conceived of as an ideal city, but always an ideal city of the moment. So I think every generation, like I said, invents the wheel anew. That was not any different in the Renaissance, in Italian Renaissance, top image, or in the period of modernism, right before the Second World War, when efficiency, speed, traffic, zoning of functions were amongst the most modern and avant-garde ideas of the architectural profession at the moment, and that is being reflected in the ideal city of the moment, of Hilversum in this case. So, and this is something that new towns cannot escape. So even if these ideas are always thought of at that moment as the idea for the future, there is nothing as outdated as a new town. You can always pinpoint it right exactly to one moment in time. Some ideas have made a little tradition. For instance, the idea of the grid city, which was invented, you could say, that's 2,500 years ago in Greece. In this case, you see on the left the Milete by Hippodamus, the Greek planner. But this idea of the grid city came slightly mitigated, came back in the American new cities that were planned from the 18th and 19th century on. So here you see an image of Washington. So some spatial ideas do travel over time and adopt to different functions and different ideas. They have that power, and the grid city definitely has that. Here these ideas are all also exported. On the left, you see the 17th century piece of Amsterdam with the canals, clearly recognizable as a small piece of colonial planning. But as usually happens, this has become totally immersed in the fabric of Jakarta. You can still see the water and the canals. There's no way for me to point this out, I think, but I think it's very clear to see. So the shape of the canal stays, but the whole idea of this city based on water transport, on defense, on the waterline, is immersed in a different kind of fabric that has grown over time. So let me start with Brasilia, which is basically the most well-known of these capital cities, the major city in Brazil. I think obscured by my own picture, you would be able to see the image of Brazil, where you can see that Rio de Janeiro was the capital before Brasilia. So it's on the coast, very much still from a colonial way of thinking based on the coast. But in the 50s, the President Kubitschek decided that there should be a new capital based right in the center of the city, of the country, a city that was the symbol of the modernization of the country. It was kind of a nationalist advertising, you could say, and it was also populating the poor inner provinces. What was also for the president and for the government an advantage of this position was that it was safe from riots and protests, which often happened in Rio de Janeiro, the then capital. And you see here the design that was made by Lucio Costa, Brazilian planner, and it has, well, you could say the shape of a bird or a plane, one of the two. It has a central axis which includes all the administrative buildings, and then two wings with housing. So it has a highly recognizable shape with all its pros and cons, I would say, because I'll get to that later. Because how to maintain that, basically. On the left, you see the axis with the administrative buildings, with the National Assembly in the end, buildings by Oscar Niemeyer, the most famous Brazilian architect. So a lot of prestige was going into this design, and it was published everywhere. Everyone would go to see this city, and yeah, there was a lot of costs and ambition spent on the designs of the city and of these public buildings. The wings with these housing blocks also were very neatly designed in squadras, as you see on the right. So there were housing buildings, very modern, very sleek looking. They were raised up on pilotis, just like the rules of Le Corbusier prescribed. They were kind of luxurious, and of course they were not meant for a cross section of society, but mostly for the diplomats and civil servants that worked there. Also, a sign of the times is the modernist emphasis on the zoning, on the separation of the different functions, and a lot of emphasis on car traffic. So this whole city is crossed and by these huge highways that have 8 or 10 lanes, and that form huge barriers in the city, but were regarded at the time as a sign of modernization and of future-oriented design. But what you also see is that, of course, the city continues to develop. It doesn't stop at this wings. It doesn't stop at the aeroplane or bird. Other people flock to the city. The city becomes a magnet for development. And not only the people who can afford to live in these super quadras come to the city, but also other layers of society, which have expanded the city hugely. And as you can see now, that on the left you see a zoom in with in red the original master plan, but the city has sort of flooded on every side. It doesn't stop at the master plan. And if you look at the present Google Maps, which you see on the right, then completely on the bottom, there's still this slight shape of the bird. But for the rest, these are all new neighborhoods, new urban areas, partly formal, partly informal. The whole idea of having a master plan, a capital in a forest surrounded by water and trees, that has, you could say, completely disappeared because of this development over time, over 50, 60 years, in which it has, organically grown. And this is something that I don't think it was foreseen in the master plan. It was not looking forward to the to future developments that much. And there are other cities that have done that, and I think these would be interesting lessons for also for Nusantara. Another capital, also a while ago, a little bit more recent, the city of Abuja in Nigeria, the capital of Nigeria since the 90s, was started in 1979. And it is also, interesting to see. It follows a lot of the same rules as Brasilia. So it also moves the location from the capital, from the coast. Again, a colonial location, very much connected to the shipping that went on from the 17th century on. So it moved to the inland. In Abuja, there was a special reason to do this because the country was split up between different tribes. There was not necessarily a national identity. There were competing tribes. And the new location of Abuja was bringing together these diverse tribal allegiances in a national identity. Moreover, at the geographic center of the country. So also this location and the building of this capital was symbolic for neutrality, but also for national unity, for modernization, etc. The plan in this case was not made by a planner from Nigeria, but by the International Planning Associates, which was a trio of American offices who took the task to develop this master plan, again based on efficiency, modernization, traffic, and what you can also see here is the just like in Brasilia, the central axis which houses the administrative buildings in the central location. And the central location, which is called the Capitol Complex, was not designed by these American offices, but by the Japanese architect office of Kenzo Tange. And what you see here is, a combination, I would say, of Japanese modernism in the repetition of these blocks that make up the Capitol Complex, but also at the top of it, at the end of the axis, you see the National Assembly, and that is located right next to a place of traditional significance, which is called Asso Hill. And that was, this traditional mythical importance of the mountain was stressed in this new plan from Tange. So there was kind of a combination, stability, nationality, but also cultural myth and a relation to tradition, I would say. Then the reason why this new city needed to be, was decided to be designed, had to do with the sort of uncontrolled growth of Lagos, for which it is, think of Coal House project and the documentary that he made, for which the city is still famous, amongst architects, that is. Amongst the military government of that time, it was a hugely negative connotation with Lagos, and that was basically one of the main reasons to leave this location and move to the inland. So to leave the chaos behind, because as you see, the traffic is a nightmare in Lagos. There is an uncontrolled situation, lack of space, of course, for building, and moreover, it was also hugely expensive because of all these reasons. In Abuja, that was not the case. So the left images of Abuja, and you can see the streets are kind of different, kind of empty, and everything is much more accessible. Also controllable, which was also a very important element for the military government. Also the the centers of the government and the administration could be easily locked off. So there's also a Haussmannian approach into the design of this city, which makes the military control of the city much easier. Well, by now, there are many satellite cities around Abuja, which has grown to 3 million people. The city of Abuja itself is only 900,000. So there's actually more people living around the city than inside. And inside the city, you also have a lot of informal settlements in all the green nudges between neighborhoods in every space that is empty, basically. People who build their homes and their communities. And usually it is because they work there. So they cannot afford to become commuters and move back and forth to the satellite cities, but especially the urban poor move into these squatter zones, and they make a living there. But from 2003 to 2007, so that's only 4 years, and in that short period, 800,000 of these people, so-called squatters, were evicted and forcibly removed to make way for urban redevelopment. So you could say that Abuja, I think they have sort of forgotten to house this layer of the population that is definitely needed inside the center of the city. And they have not made provisions for them to live anywhere else. So the plans have not been able to keep pace with the growth of with the magnet function of this city. But you could also say, is it even possible to build for this layer of society? This is a central question that I will come back later. So those are two, Brasilia and Abuja are two capital cities that you can already see a number of elements that are also present and visible in the planning of Nusantara. But I would like to go back one step in history again, if you allow, to point out a difference between the present generation of cities, the present wheels, and the previous wheels that we had in the 50s and 60s. And that has a lot to do with politics and economy. So the cities that were built in the 50s, 60s, 70s, mostly in Western Europe, but also outside, were built for a cross-section of society. So they were built for workers, for civil servants, for teachers, drivers, for the middle class, and a very small layer for the upper middle class. And that's also why these buildings, maybe they don't look so pretty. They look very sober. They look very simple. They are not posh or luxury, but they housed everybody. So I would call them welfare state cities, in line with the whole idea that the state provides for the population. That's a whole system that actually now hardly exists anymore. I'm speaking a bit broadly here, but I hope you will forgive me, because I think also broadly speaking, we have all shifted to this whole system of neoliberal economy. And the cities have shifted along with this new insight in economy and politics. So, like I already mentioned, these neoliberal cities are, I would say, first and foremost, they are economic projects. They are usually meant to attract FDI, foreign direct investment. They are meant to create employment. They are meant to compete with other cities for economic attraction. They are global cities working on the global level. They respond to global needs, not so much to local needs. And again, depending on your worldview, you can see like this amazing images of future cities, or you can see like this modern technology nightmare. That is, I leave that up to you for a moment. But you could say like, yeah, maybe it looks yeah, completely nice or attractive, but what is actually the downside of it? Because you could say this is also a part of these neoliberal cities, like the gated communities that these cities are often made out of, that are repeated within these cities. And Bumi Serpong Damai in Jakarta is definitely also one of them. The attraction of these kind of neighborhoods are very clear. So they are safe. There's a lot of security. They are clean. They have new houses. There's a certain amount of luxury, and they have working amenities like electricity or water. And that is something that these old, historically, organically grown cities often don't have. So what's wrong with them? Well, I think that's also very clear. They lead to an increased amount of spatial segregation, because these kind of areas, they largely function as enclaves. As you can see in this advertising, it's a billboard in the Cairo area, a new town called Sheikh Zayed city. And they are, yeah, marketed with these safety and lifestyle slogans. A little bit less explicit, they also say this is a homogeneous environment with people like you. And they definitely meet a marking demand. They supply housing for people who can afford it. But where are all the other people? Well, to show you an example where they are, I'm showing this, Quilamba, a city in Africa, Angola, built and designed, managed, etc., by the China International Trust Investment Corporation. This is a city that was about 10 years ago finished, and it consists of this. It looks almost like a Chinese city, like an export of a Chinese city. And you could ask, yeah, for whom is it meant, and for whom is it definitely not meant? Is it a good idea to have this export? Is it suitable for this African environment, which is, yeah, of course, of a very different nature and culture as the Chinese context? So if we look at that, we can also see this. So if you look on the map, then on the left you see again this repeated Chinese towers of Quilamba, aiming at the supposedly emerging middle class of Angola. But immediately next to it, you see the big slum that has come into existence next to it. So as soon as the Chinese started building, people flocked to this area, of course, because they expected employment, and they started to build their own houses there. In Portuguese, it's called the musex. And almost 50% of Angolan population lives in this way. So there is a huge divide between the two, but the one attracts the other. And this is what it looks like. So the streets in Quilamba look kind of, I wouldn't say Chinese, but almost Western, with terraces where you can drink your latte on outside in the shade. And in the musex, it's kind of this barren ground, no amenities, no yeah, no luxury, no streets, nothing, no schools, etc. But if you look at it, the reason why these people are moving into this vicinity of Quilamba is because they expect employment and because they work there. So there is actually an economic symbiosis between the two. So the people who clean, who drive, who do all kinds of domestic work, they live in these self-built areas, and that is the reason why they moved there. So you could also look at this symbiosis and possibly find a better way to spatially design this, because the contrast is definitely not what we would call an inclusive or just or fair environment, but it's also clear that the two belong together. So on what grounds would people also like to share spaces? And of course, you would also wish that the people in the Moesteks would also have the public services and the infrastructures and the networks that exist in the new town. But that's not the case. They remain spatially segregated. Well, and then this segregation is also a very clear aspect, also again with a lot of disadvantages, but maybe also an advantage, in this case of the new administrative capital in Cairo in Egypt. So you all have images of Cairo in your head probably, which is like this mega city of 17 million people, hugely congested, where informal life on all levels has taken over from formal organizations, where also the affordable housing is built by people themselves, these huge brick buildings that are so densely packed. But it's also a city of a lot of pollution, lack of space for the extension of houses, etc. And it is a complete opposite of the master plan that was designed by SOM, Skidmore, Owings and Merrill from Chicago, big master planning firm from the US. And on the right, you see a bit of how far it has developed until now. They have been working on it for 8-9 years now. And this is a city on 60 kilometers distance of the downtown Cairo, in which you can see a lot of familiar aspects by now. You see the housing swirls in which these repetitive housing blocks are placed. You also see the central axis with this symmetrical layout of administrative and ministerial buildings. And you can see that it's right in the middle of the desert. So this is something that is strongly anchored in Egyptian spatial planning nationwide, this conquering of the desert, which is also, I would say, an economic endeavor, because the land is all owned by the government as well as the military. And the military also has this building department that takes care of the design and building of these cities. So why is this city being built? Well, in the first place, because of this, to take distance from this congested downtown, to again attract foreign direct investment. So the main headquarters of the Googles and Amazons, they are supposed to take their buildings here to create employment for the Egyptian economy, but also because it's a lot safer and secure, and because of the necessity to have safety from riots. You will all remember the riots from 2011 at the Arabian Spring time. Below you see this image of Tahrir Square in Cairo, and you will remember the kind of force and the immense amounts of people who demonstrated there. And it was a moment in which the government decided that this is out of control, the city was already considered out of control because of its density, because of the chaotic traffic, because of the narrow streets. But the riots and the political threat that came from that in 2011 nudged the government only a few years to start this huge and hugely expensive project in the middle of the desert. And also what you see on the right is the defense headquarters in this new capital. And of course, you know, the Pentagon. In this case, it's called Octagon. It's way bigger and larger than the Pentagon. So the Octagon military headquarters are part of this new city of Cairo, also symbolizing the huge influence of the army. Then in the SOM renderings, of course, there's a lot of greenery, there's sustainability, there's trees and water. While there in the new capital city, there is no water available. It needs to be pumped from the Nile and made in desalination factories. There's no wells whatsoever in this area, but there is a green backbone considered in the renderings, but in reality you can see that it looks more desert-like still. And yeah, I think it will probably also remain that way. There's also a huge emphasis on car traffic still. Yeah, the whole sustainability issues with these kind of cities that are so huge that they cause a lot of traffic have not been taken into consideration, but also people without a car, and that's about 92% in Cairo, can never reach this new city. There is also no public transport, and therefore also the informal economy is almost completely absent. So in this case, there is really a separation between the informal city and the formal new capital. The new capital is being built for people with an official job and with a bank account and with a credit card and with a car. Well, and then you could also say this increases the problems in downtown Cairo, because all the investment money is going to this new capital city. It's not being invested in the existing city, so it will slowly deteriorate and become impossible to live in. That's one view and one prediction that you could say. But other people also say it might be a blessing in disguise. Maybe you know the author David Sims, who wrote extensively about the Egyptian new towns, because there's actually many of these desert towns around Cairo. And he wrote that the success of Cairo as an informal city with all its informal amenities and sort of waste collection and the building and etc., all this success is due to the lack of attention that the formal powers are paying to it. So he's actually saying, yes, let them please direct their investments elsewhere and leave the informal city in peace so it can develop in its own ingenious way. So there's different ways to look at this. But of course, I'm not going to talk about Nusantara directly, but indirectly. Of course, you could ask, what exactly is a city? I think that should be the first question, of course, when you start thinking about planning a city. And especially with these new capital cities, it seems like the planners often answer that a city is a whole lot of administrative buildings along an axis within a well-ordered master plan that is symmetrical and has a number of focal points. I would say that is, yeah, completely besides the point. Of course, a city is a lot more, it's a complex organism, but it is defined by the people who live there. So who are living in this city, and where are they living? And how will the planning of this city look after the master plan has been finished? Because that's what we've been seeing in Brasilia, in Abuja, that this first master plan is being designed as a thing in itself, but it's not. It will become part of this organically growing city, and it needs already to have the links that make it easy to extend this city, and that don't destroy the original qualities of the master plan. I don't think it's a matter of coherent image. So of course, the city looks different in almost in every decade, and definitely in each century. But to make an efficient working organism, there needs to be a sense of how to enlarge the city in a kind of easy and organic way. So now I'm going to draw on some research that we did for this book that I showed previously, which is called To Build a City in Africa. And then we were looking at what are actually the 10 main advices that we could give when people, maybe against better judgment, are starting to build these new settlements or new cities. And we came up after extensive consultation with parties, with local parties and universities, with these 10 advices, of which I think a few are also usable and useful for Indonesia. In the first place, we said planning is an ongoing process. So this seems, well, a lot of these seem actually like a no-brainer, like very much of an open door. But actually, if you look at the planning of new towns, this is something that people often seem to forget. So just like I said before, even when a city starts with a master plan, it needs to be open-ended. It is an ongoing process. The city is nothing more than the start of a process. And this needs to be, so it's the dynamics of this need to be recognized. Plan for, I will go through a few of them. Plan for adaptivity is another advice, which sort of overlaps with the previous. The future, to most of us, is probably 99% of us will recognize that the future is unknown to us. And so we need to plan for this city to be adaptive in 10 years, in 20 or in 50 years. Because like you've seen in Jakarta, the small piece of Batavia is still there. It can still be recognized, even though it's built more than 200 years ago. What we do now will remain present in our cities, and it needs to be adaptive, and it needs to be able to adjust to new circumstances, new economies, new people, new ways of living, etc. So how do you do this? That is, of course, a very difficult question. And some cities have actually been better in it than others. This is an image of Chandigarh, the well-known new capital of the Punjab, designed in the 50s by Le Corbusier. It's kind of a grid city, of which Le Corbusier designed the original set of grids with a set of roads and also a green grid. And after this was finished, the master plan was also easily and organically expanded, just repeating these grids up to 100 or even more. So this is an easy way of setting a starting point and making it possible to extend. Another, yeah, it doesn't always work. This is another example in which case it didn't work. The city of Tema, it's by now it's a part of the capital of Ghana, Accra. And as you can see on the left, you see all these squares and the arrows, meaning that these squares can be repeated to extend the city if needed. But if you look on the Google Maps, you can see that these few squares are hardly recognizable, just a little bit over here, and the rest of this huge city is all filled in a completely different way. So you also need a spatial department and a political will to extend these master plan first starting points. So it's not only depending on the quality of a master plan. If you want to design a forest city, I would say this is point 7 of the manual that we made for these African cities is of importance. And we said as an advice, use a blue-green infrastructure, so water and greenery, as the central framework of the city, because often it is done exactly the other way around. So first the buildings are put in a master plan, first the housing, for instance, and then in the areas that are left over, that is the areas that become green. But if you really want to have a forest city and have the character of the green function as the identity of the city, as a strong ecology, then you should also design the forest first. So not leave space open for this for trees, but design the forest and especially the borders of the forest, because history shows that these are the easiest demolished, really. So if they are not protected, then the forest will easily disappear. It's not only about designing the borders, it's also about thinking of the ecology, things that architects or planners are not necessarily good in, designing from the ecology of the forest, and also making sure that it can exist in the long term, which is even more difficult. And then another point that I think should be, is also a no-brainer, but how do you do it, particularly, is the idea of diversity. So to have diversity in a city is, I would say, one of the most characteristic elements of having a city, having a social mix, an economic mix, having a mix of functions. That is what, I would say that it's the consensus amongst planners nowadays, that this mix is really what you need to get a vibrant city. But if we look at new towns that are being built, like this image of a Chinese new town, you don't necessarily see diversity. You see upper class housing, you see middle class skyscrapers, you see some other higher housing blocks. They are zoned, they are separate from each other. Small houses for the sort of lower layers of society, they don't exist. And that's not just because of this image, but that is necessarily true. That is true for many of these cities. So they are not, you would say they are not inclusive. If you would judge them on fairness and inclusivity, they wouldn't do very well. So on this level, they are not diverse enough. And I think this other advice of combining top-down and bottom-up also makes a lot of sense, especially for cities in the global south, because of the almost impossibility of really building for the urban poor. And so including the top-down building and the bottom-up activities of residents themselves is, I would say, a task that is also necessary in Nusantara. Why should it be done like that? Why cannot a city be built purely for the people who can afford it? It is again because, like I said, also in Quilamba, economically, there is a kind of symbiosis between these informal and poor areas and the formal and rich areas, on the other hand. Clearly illustrated by this example from Shenzhen. Maybe you know in China, especially in Shenzhen, where which is also a new town built from the 80s and has all these pockets which are called village in the city, self-built settlements, incredibly high density, poor living environments, but also they function as arrival cities for new migrants coming in from the countryside. They have lots of informal activities, but also entrepreneurship, like restaurants, for instance, which means that during lunch break, the people from these offices go to the villages, the urban villages, and this is the place where they have lunch, where they get their shoes fixed when they're broken, where they buy their clothing. So there is, again, an economic symbiosis between these two areas, which also necessitates their vicinity. They should be close to each other. And this is an idea that was already years ago voiced by Saskia Sassen. When we talk about global cities, there are also local cities. So these local layers of people, they are also inhabiting the city, and it wouldn't function without them. You cannot have, you cannot attract the foreign direct investment and the headquarters without also providing for the housing for the cleaning ladies, for the drivers, etc. Think of the policemen and the teachers and all these people that also make up the city, and there should be a spot for them to live, and not small pockets. I would encourage you to think of the percentages. So I think the urban poor in Jakarta is about 5%. Lower middle class, I'm not sure. Is it 20%? Is it 40%? Is it more? But it's a high percentage, which means that if Nusantara wants to become like a real city and not just an administrative center with diplomats and civil servants, it also needs to provide for these layers of society, and also immediately from the beginning to prevent, like in Abuja, that all these informal settlements sort of clog the streets, all the green zones, and don't have their own space. How can that be done? Because a lot of people will say, yes, we want to build for the poor or for the lower middle classes, but this is impossible because it's way too expensive. But again, here we can look to history, and where there is one, I think, very inspiring practice that has been very forgotten, but was widely practiced in the 70s and 80s, and it's called sites and services. And it's this practice in which not complete houses are built for the lower classes, for the lower income classes, but just the cores of these houses. And the rest of the houses are being built by the residents themselves. So what you see here in the left in this image, you see the beginnings of all these houses, which is a concrete basement and a sanitary core, which consists of a bathroom, a toilet, so water and sewage, probably electricity, and that is the core from which then all the other rooms are constructed. And the inhabitants don't only get this plot on which they can build, but they also get this manual in which it is shown, if you have a plot, you can first build something here, then you can extend it here. So you can extend it horizontally, but also vertically, until it becomes a bigger house according to your savings and your needs. And this sites and services was, as I said, widely practiced, most of all in India and in Latin America. This is a project in India, in the city of Indore. The neighborhood is called Aranya, and it was a project by Balkrishna Doshi, a sort of a pilot project. Quite beautiful, I think. And you can also see why it has been forgotten, because it is almost unrecognizable as a project or as a design, because it isn't. The people themselves have greatly extended these houses until it became this rather vibrant and dense neighborhood. But this is a way, I think, that could, if accommodated in the master plan, could also provide a space for the lower income classes to become a part of this city. Now, we could also discuss if this is necessary, but I think from my point of view in my story, I have made clear that I think this is necessary to include these groups because they are large, because they deserve to, because they are a large percentage of the population, and because that is what an inclusive and fair society is. Another project that you might know, which is also closely related to this, is this project of Alejandro Aravena and his office Elemental. And he built this house in social housing in Chile. So he built them, but also the idea here is that the residents finish them. So they also use their own hands to save this money and to finish the house. So there are different ways of giving shape to these sites and services. Some very cheap, some less, like this one. Some very small scale, some more large scale. But yeah, I would advise you to look into these practices to see if it would be usable for Indonesia. So here we are at the end of my story. I would say the first thing that comes from the historic examples is this idea of planning as a dynamic process. So this designing the plan so it can adapt and grow, and be nature inclusive and socially fair. These are all high ambitions, and I would say it hasn't been done yet. So that's a little reminder that it is very difficult. Another conclusion is that a new town is not a project. It's the start of a process. And I think this is where design thinking should come in, because for project developers, it often is a project. Then the point I made is of this, even if Nusantara becomes a global city in a way, attracting also global capital, global expats, global companies, it should be inclusive. It should also be local. And all these things, this inclusivity, should be thought of right from the start. And it needs a level of realism, thinking about the population. And now I'm thinking about my own country, the Netherlands, where almost every urban planning project starts with the idea of a middle-class population moving in. But this is wishful thinking from the side of the planners. if you don't have a middle class population, it will also not be a middle class population living in these new cities. So, and then finally, if you want a forest city, design the forest, but also the means that it can stay and be maintained for a long time. Otherwise, I'm not sure if it can be done. And with this warning, I leave you. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Michelle. That was wonderful. Quite daunting, actually. I think I have a list of, as you know, I have a long list of questions, but I will try and kind of merge them with the questions that I find here in the chat. There's already 2 good ones. But let me kind of take a step back. The first kind of daunting reality is that there seems to be very little progress in 100 years of new town designing and planning. Seems that the ones built today, for instance, in Egypt, are repeating the same issues that we see in Brasilia, and indeed, as you point out, are similar to some of the design choices that have been made in Nusantara. I had quite a long list of similarities. They're both forest cities, they are for diplomats, they are based around this axis, very strong axis indeed. They are to decongest Jakarta. They are kind of based on a somewhat of a blueprint, and they're very isolated, and in Borneo. So there's many similarities, and I'm just wondering if we're not falling into the same traps over and over again, and is anybody kind of listening to this more procedural, or at least maybe a process-driven and feedback-driven way of planning? Are people
Is that a question to me, Neville?
are people listening? Are people taking notice of these warnings? Are people heeding these important kind of lessons?
Well, I think what I'm saying, if you, yes, I think there is a kind of a consensus around what I'm saying, but only in academia, only amongst academic writers, you will find a lot of the same warnings and analysis. But I find there is a really big gap between academia and policymakers. So we have also with INTI worked with project developers in Africa, with policymakers in different places in Latin America and in Asia. And there I find, no awareness of these issues at all. And maybe it is a question of if you start a daunting project like this to make a new capital, then of course you have the optimism and sort of the future orientation that you think you really need this energy to think that you're doing something beautiful. But critique is often not very welcome.
Right. They almost need that level of, dare I say, naivety to kind of start a project as ambitious as this, right? But then I totally agree. This kind of weird schism between theory and practice is dominating our discipline. I would want to ask: is it even as bad as that form, that the act of planning in the sense of form giving, of shaping a template? Is that even necessary? If I look at your examples, it seems to me that the actual shape in which these things, even though they all look similar, the actual shape doesn't really seem to matter that much.
No, I think you're probably right. I think what is very important is this it's almost what was just put in the chat, like what questions do you ask in advance? And for what period of time do you ask them? And it's not about giving an answer, but maybe about giving the possibility to extend, to postpone giving the answer for the longest time. So to keep it open for a long time. And I think that is probably one of the most difficult things in planning. But that would be the challenge here, I think.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. So not making the decisions that don't absolutely have to be made at that given moment in time.
But I think a lot of decisions have been made already. And
right.
Talking about Nusantara. So this is in general, but in Nusantara, I'm not sure if this openness, is still possible. But that I leave that up to you.
Well, the openness, I think in that sense, there's one question about how to maintain the what I would call the green edge, the frontier between the forest and the city. The beauty of this assignment is that we don't have to worry about maintaining it because it doesn't exist, right? There is a monoculture there, and we need to somehow magically have the new city seed a new forest, which is kind of the reverse of everything we've seen so far. Cities chopping forest down. Here we need to have a city that somehow seeds a city, and that's in that sense really radically new, and you can't make that mistake. Although, and that brings me to my second sort of main question, this whole issue of flexibility. And that goes to the point of ambition as well. You could argue maybe if you look at Brasilia, they haven't been ambitious enough. If only they had planned it even larger, even more grandiose, than all those extensions would have been incorporated in the big vision, right? Or is that not the flexibility you're talking about?
No, not really. I think what they should have done probably in Brazil is separate the idea of capital city and exclusive city, because I think otherwise, it's not a city that you are shaping at all. An exclusive city, what is that even? Does anyone like an exclusive city? Don't we want to have the liberty to also be part of this city, or is it purely for the diplomats? So in Brasilia, I think grandiosité there, you can check that. That's absolutely what they provided. But the whole concept of living together, that has, to my taste, not been given enough attention.
Okay, but that brings me to my third and final question. You mentioned China as a sort of template that is being copied and that's being replicated, admired, especially in emerging economies. I hope you're still there. Your image is gone, but that's okay.
I'm still here. Yes.
Oh yeah, good. So the Chinese model is in that sense rather unique because it has been able to, let's say, create out of nothing a middle class and home ownership and buying into these empty buildings in empty cities on an empty land somewhere in the distance has been able to generate an economy that has somehow sustained. So in that sense, there seems to be a business model. I think somebody should turn off their mics. Most likely, Janita. I think in many scenarios, people want to believe in this business model that through building the city, through planning the city, we can generate wealth that is lasting and even reaches and builds up a middle class. And why does that then keep failing? Is it just China in that sense just unique?
Yeah, I even wonder if you could really say that it's always successful in China. But yeah, and I think in this case, to a large degree, the situation is, the context is so incomparable because of it's the nature of Nusantara as as a city which is actually replacing another one in a certain function, because of the distance between the two, and because of the cultural context being very different in Nusantara. You say the forest is not presently there, but it is surrounding the city. And even though it will maybe not intrude on these sort of plantation areas, a city is not an island, as you could say. It has roots, and it has connections to other places, to a harbor or to another city. So there will be roads, and there will be harbors, and there will be factories, and there will be things that are not allowed into the city. So there will be a spread outside, a sort of centrifugal force, so you will. And I think maybe as an economic model, it might work, but I think that is not my biggest worry in this case.
Okay, I'm glad to hear that. We are concerned also. You can flip it around. I think you did that as well. Maybe not attracting foreign investment could be an advantage. I see a number of questions in the chat that relate to culture, the diversity, which certainly in Indonesia is a very strong feature, a very rich cultural diversity. Then that is tied to local identities that somehow need to find their way in this new framework. Are there successes or failures or do's or don'ts that you can think of how to deal with all that diversity?
Well, this diversity is part of tradition, of culture, and of communities. And to include these communities in the planning process could be a way forward. To exclude them would definitely also exclude all the richness that is embedded in these communities. However, this is what I usually see. And then, now I'm with the risk of sounding very cynical, but usually it's, yes, we included the community because we kept this one tree, and that's all. But that's not what I mean. So it is to develop the whole idea of the city together with the communities. That is a planning process that would really do justice to these diversity and the cultural background of the people.
Right. Now, I want to push a little bit because you've done a lot of work and your colleagues have done a lot of work on this also, especially in China. How do you engage communities to actually partake in the planning process, and not just during that one session that kind of green lights the whole project, but to engage them for the long run?
That is another question that I wish I had the sort of the answer. But part of the answer, of course, is taking people serious and engaging them for the long run, making sure that they also have a stake in the process. So if you just ask them and inform them in a sort of gratuitous way, then that is not the way. But if they can also, for instance, develop their own communities and also have a serious place in this planning process for the long term, then they could really influence the plan. I don't think that happens a lot. It doesn't even. In fact, I think it's probably the opposite, because what I've been reading is that communities around Nusantara have actually been complaining about not being seen. So that is a pity.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I think there's a scalar challenge there. They tend to be fragmented and quite small. And if this takes off in a grand way, then of course it will come from all directions of Indonesia and flood to this new center. And you'll get a whole new kind of dynamic, how to incorporate all these different voices. I see two questions relating to technology. I kind of know that you mentioned in the beginning that's a topic you almost want to steer away from, but is there a way to avoid making technology just the kind of the raison d'être of your project? It is a new system, and therefore it will work on unlike previous failed attempts, etc., etc. Is there a role for technology that you see that's maybe more healthy?
Well, I think in the provision of public services, there is a role for smart technology. If you make like care or education more accessible to more people, then I think it could be beneficial for a lot of people. Of course, it takes, it's a matter of and political will and the right agreements with technological organizations, because often control and cost savings are priorities, and then only at point priority 10 there is the abundance of public services that could be beneficial. But this could also be a way to involve communities in the process. And I think there are usually, when you have a new town, there are a lot of social processes that are quite complicated, because people come from everywhere. They are all pioneers in this new city. A lot of things are not arranged yet, so they need to be built up from the ground. There is entrepreneurship, but maybe you want to also guide this in a certain direction to a certain spot. People get to know each other. Like, well, you can imagine this building of a social fabric could possibly benefit also from smart technology, but also needs to be accommodated. But especially in public services, I do see a role. Maybe also public transport, but because this is another thing that if it is not included in the city right from the start, in whatever low-tech or high-tech form that you want, it makes living in the city really limited and difficult, especially for the groups about which we're talking that are not necessarily automatically coming to the city.
Right. I see that Prof. Wiewiek just raised her hand. Please go ahead.
No, I just want to kindly remind that we should end our session at 9. And we still have some questions that might not be covered. I'm sorry, just a bit late now in Indonesia, so
Correct.
we should manage to be finished at 9 in a way.
You're absolutely right. That's terribly sad. There are a bunch of questions still that kind of are not tapped into. Let me finish with a kind of extension of this last point you made, Michelle. The new hot buzzwords in this realm are related to sort of, let's say, nature-based solutions, sort of how technology and nature kind of find a new symbiosis, maybe akin to what you've been talking about, a symbiosis between urban poor and the lower middle class, kind of supporting and mutually supporting the elite or the richer communities. So nature-based solutions, is that something that you see actually being actualized, and do you believe in it? Or maybe even a step beyond that, ecosystem services, how we are, I hope it's not becoming too specific, but how we are kind of able to feed these cities with nearby forests, edible forests, permaculture, etc. So to what extent can we, let's say, claim nature, even though we failed previously, and make it part of the city?
Well, I think it would be wonderful if nature-based solutions and also more compact food cycles and consumption cycles would be able to come about in this city. That would be wonderful. But I think in general, because I think for the last 2 minutes, these nature-based solutions also belong to the whole basis that I would advise or would like to see. This is like the traditional culture, the qualities of the space and of the place. So not necessarily of the region, so to speak, of the communities that exist there, of habits, stories, myths. This whole I'm not sure if it is well known amongst everybody, but these I think should be the basis and the ingredients for basing a plan on, to make sure that they continue on also in the future, and make this a city which is not comparable to a Chinese city or an African city, but really rooted in its location, in its culture. That would be beautiful.
Wow, that's the perfect ending, Michelle. Thank you. That's wonderful. That was extremely insightful and really pleasant, and a great kickoff to the whole series. So thank you. Thank you all for joining. And my colleagues, I hope I can get them on screen now. Provoost, and are you there? Pak Ruku also.
Yeah.
Thank you again for bringing everybody on board. It's a pretty decent group, and we see each other next week.
Yeah, next week. And please, before we end the session, I would like to kindly remind for the participants who attend tonight and have not yet registered to join the competition, if you join since the beginning, then you will get the access to have more information regarding data and so on. So I hope you not only join the lecture series, but also access to the uh, to join the competitions. Yeah. I hope I give the right information, yeah, Neville. Yeah, I think that's all.
Push them hard. Everybody in Indonesia and outside, please register. Okay. Thank you all.
Good luck.
Okay, thank you. See you next
Thank
week.
you,
Thank you,
Michelle.
Michelle. Very nice presentation. I really enjoy. Bye. Have
Thank
a
you.
nice day. Thank you, everybody. Good night from Indonesia, from Semarang.